Hey everyone, welcome back. I just got finished reading the new bill that would raise the debt ceiling. Now, I know that I was pretty skeptical that Biden and McCarthy would actually come to a negotiated agreement, but it seems like they managed to pull it off, so good for them. However, now that the text is out in the open, there are a lot of people who aren't very happy with what's in the bill. So, let's quickly go through what the bill would actually do, and then we'll discuss the more important question of, do they have the votes to pass it? First things first, the debt ceiling is suspended until 2025. This is advantageous for both parties as, unlike the GOP's prior proposal, which would only extend the debt ceiling to 2024, now it's been pushed back beyond the 2024 election cycle, so neither party has to deal with this massive crisis again during election season, which I think everybody benefits from. However, when it comes to spending, the GOP wanted a lot of cuts, but broadly speaking, they're not in this bill. Spending for 2024 is capped at current levels, and there is a 1% increase allocated for 2025. So we're not seeing that cut back to 2022 levels that were in the original GOP bill. As a matter of fact, the only actual spending cut in this bill is a reduction of the funding that the Democrats allocated to the IRS. However, the Democrats allocated $80 billion, and the Republicans are only taking away $2 billion. So really just a drop in the bucket when you think about things on a government scale of spending. Additionally, the government is reclaiming any unspent COVID-19 relief funding, which at the end of the day makes sense. The government allocated it for a specific purpose, and now that the pandemic is over, that purpose no longer exists, so the government should be able to reclaim it. Now, we don't know how much money this is going to account for, but it is at least something. Additionally, where Republicans did want to impose a lot of work requirements on different federal programs, the only one that's still in the bill is an increase in the age for work requirements for food stamps, which raised the age from 50 to 54. However, the Democrats were able to get an exemption for veterans and anyone who's homeless, as well as getting expansions for those services for these two vulnerable groups. So, both sides getting a win there. The other big thing in here is energy permitting reform, which really just streamlines the timelines and agencies responsible for conducting environmental impact reviews for energy projects. And this is going to be beneficial to both fossil and renewable fuel companies, so again, kind of a mixed bag here. And that's it. Overall, this isn't a terrible bill given the circumstances. Whenever you're dealing with political hostage negotiations, it's all about damage mitigation, and I think Biden and the White House did a very good job of limiting what elements of the original Republican House bill made it into this final deal. There aren't any of the spending cuts that were proposed outside of that very small $2 billion out of the $80 billion allocated to the IRS. Everything else is just a one-year spending cap followed by a one-year limited 1% increase. When it comes to adding work requirements to safety net programs, Democrats were able to limit it to single individuals with no dependents between the ages of 50 to 54 who are applying for food stamps. Meanwhile, Republicans wanted to apply it to other things such as Medicaid and other social safety net programs, so they were able to limit the scope and draw exclusions for veterans and homeless individuals, while additionally expanding resources being given to those two vulnerable groups. Now, this work requirement will still inevitably kick some people off of a program that they desperately need, and certainly that's not a good thing, but given what Republicans were trying to do in their initial bill, it's certainly the more preferable of the two outcomes. But there are definitely going to be people who are going to be dissatisfied with this bill. You've got some progressives who are opposed to these work requirements, and I get that. But there are also a lot of conservatives who are very mad that all of the spending cuts that they wanted didn't make it into this bill. So, given that we have dissenting voices on both sides, the question is, can this bill actually pass? I do think the votes are going to be there, even if there are more Democratic votes for this than there are Republican votes. We already know that the Freedom Caucus and those representatives aligned with them aren't going to vote for this bill, and I'm sure there's a whole lot of other Republicans who are going to be more afraid of a primary challenge than a general election challenge, and therefore they're going to oppose this bill as well. But for Democrats, the electoral math is a little bit different. If they also oppose this piece of legislation, it gives Republicans the opportunity to argue that, well, it's not just our fault that there was a default. The Democrats also opposed the deal, so we're both responsible. even though that's not really the case. So Democrats aren't really going to want to be able to give Republicans that breathing space. They're going to want to be able to say, we did the responsible thing. Yes, we had to accept a few small compromises here and there, but we were the responsible ones that made sure the U.S. didn't default, while Republicans were more than happy to throw away the full faith and credit of the U.S. Definitely the better of the two arguments going into 2024. Once the bill passes out of the House with whatever number of votes it gets, it'll move on to the Senate, and then we have to confront the possibility of a filibuster. Senators Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz have already come out against this bill, and I would expect others like Josh Hawley, Mike Lee, and Rick Scott to also oppose this piece of legislation, and any of them could start a filibuster. And since Democrats only control 51 seats in the Senate, they would need 9 Republicans in order to break the filibuster and actually have a vote on the bill. And I'm very certain that Mitch McConnell will find those 9 votes, because if the House passes a bill in a bipartisan way, but a Republican filibuster in the Senate forces the U.S. to default, it's going to be impossible to dodge that blame. And Mitch McConnell is looking at a very good Senate map come 2024, and he does not want to lose that opportunity. So he's going to start with members like Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, and Mitt Romney, and then anyone who's not up for re-election soon, because people will forget over the next 4 to 6 years, and hopefully it'll help stave off a primary challenge against those senators. And then, once the filibuster is ended, I wouldn't expect to see those same senators then vote for the bill, but it'll be able to pass along party lines, make its way to Joe Biden's desk, be signed into law, and then we don't default on the U.S. debt. So that's good for everybody. The only thing that'll be left to figure out is whether Kevin McCarthy can manage to remain Speaker of the House or not. This deal is not popular with some of the far-right MAGA members of his caucus, and given the rules that were changed at the start of this session in order to allow Kevin McCarthy to be Speaker in the first place, it only takes one member in order for him to be removed from the Speaker's chair. And I can think of a few people who just might do it, so that'll be kind of interesting to see how it plays out. Overall, this is probably the best possible outcome that we could have hoped for given the circumstances. Yes, the Democrats could have used things like the discharge petition or the 14th Amendment to completely circumvent the House Republicans, but there's a reason that those were plans B and C. Those strategies entailed a lot more risk, and should they fail, the chances of us suffering a default were a lot higher. So, getting a bipartisan solution through Congress the normal way was really the best possible outcome. And yes, that was always going to entail some concessions to Republicans, but given what Republicans initially proposed, the concessions Democrats gave are very minor. And remember, laws can always be amended by other laws. And the issue of the budget is going to come up again in late August, early September, when we have to pass a budget or face a government shutdown. So it's very possible that some of this could change when that rolls around. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. Until then, think about it.